Hey nerdy knitters, Tanya here. Get your knitting and your favorite beverage and let's settle in for a good chat. I just put a new poll up this week if you want to pop on over and answer, or just leave a comment down below sharing how many projects you've started this year. A month or so ago, I posted one asking how many projects you completed, and somebody had the good idea of asking, the better question would be, how many projects have you started, and what would be the comparison between the two? Have you finished everything that you started at the beginning of the year? Do you have a huge pile of unfinished things and you keep casting on new things? But if you want to go answer that poll, I'll put a link for it down below. Not really much for any sort of newsy updates. I'm working on the professional hand knitter course from the Knitting Guild Association, and I've been working on module 2 for a while now. I've been busy with other design things and YouTube videos and things like that, so I haven't had as much time for it as I did for the first module, which I think I did over the summer. But my plate seems to be clearing a little bit, so I've sort of put that back on the schedule, and there's lots to do for each module. This module I had some questions to answer, and a large portion of it was learning how to grade knitting patterns. So I set up grading spreadsheets, which I've been using. I designed and knit a sweater. You can see it behind me. That was released in the last issue of Cast On magazine. I'll put a link down below for that as well. And working on grading other things like socks, which I released a pattern just a few weeks ago for the first sock design. We're doing a whole series of tutorials on the different ways to knit socks. I'm working on the magic loop method right now. So that one will be coming up very soon. With the course, I have to design a few patterns, and I don't have to knit the samples. That's the really cool part. It's kind of odd to, like, I could sort of like knit a gauge swatch, get my math from the swatch, and write the pattern just from that. I don't have to knit the sample or anything. So that is what I'm working on currently, one of those patterns. So that's sort of like not really on my needles. It's sort of like working out the grading for that, because there are specific parameters I have to follow for each of the patterns. There's 2 that I have to write for this module, and it's very strange because when I do design, I sort of like work it out on paper, but then like as I knit it, I can sort of fine tune things, like check my math and things like that. And with this, I'm not actually knitting any samples. I'm just writing the pattern. So basically like taking my gauge swatch and using that information to extrapolate all the different sizes. So that's a different way of thinking that I'm not used to. Like I do tend to do that with a lot of when I'm designing. I do sort of get at least a rough draft written, and then I change it as I go. But to write the whole thing without knitting the sample as I go is a bit strange for me, but it's a good learning experience anyway. So I've got those, I'm working on that, and I still have one more pattern to do after that. So I expect it's going to take me at least another month to get them done, even though I don't have to knit anything. I'm just writing the patterns, but it's a lot of mental work. But I'm hoping to have that done by Christmas. I figure by the middle of December I would like to have them done, so I can send that out and then sort of have a clean slate for Christmas vacation. I would like to focus on some sort of like selfish knitting, because I've been doing a lot for designing and a lot for like the sock tutorials that we'll be having on here on YouTube. So, and I haven't done much like knitting for myself. So I put a bunch of yarn on my Christmas wish list, and like 2 sweaters worth and a couple of shawls, all just for me, which was really fun to go choose different colors. My husband's not going to choose the colors and things like that. So I went, Knit Picks is having a really great sale right now. So I went and I sort of filled up a cart, and I told him, this is what I want. You can take things out, add things if you want, change things, but like the bulk of what I'd like is in the cart. So that makes shopping for him a lot easier. Well, shopping for him is still hard, but this will make things a little bit easier, I think. But I'm looking forward to my Christmas knitting, when I can just do the selfish things that I want to do. Not that I'm not going to enjoy the socks that I'm knitting. I don't mean that. It's just sometimes, you know, it's different when I have to knit something specifically for a video or specifically for design. It's not just something that, you know, I get to pick the colors and knit it for myself. It's a totally different thing. So I'm kind of looking forward to doing that over Christmas break. So I'd like to clear the decks, so to speak, and get a lot of things done and out the door so I can focus on those fun things for myself. Now, before we get to knitting questions, I do love to chat about like what I'm reading or what I'm watching, because I love to hear your comments too, like if you've read the same types of books or what you think of different TV shows. So I've been reading a lot of Agatha Christie. I've pretty much finished all of the Miss Marple books, which were fabulous. She's a knitter, and it's mentioned in the books quite a bit. And I've read a lot of the Poirot. There's a lot more Poirot to read, though. She has less Miss Marple books. But I read some of the short stories just for a different change of pace, I guess. Agatha Christie wrote a lot of books. And now I'm reading the Tommy and Tuppence books. There's not as many of them either, but it's another sort of those whodunit type mystery novels. And I read the first one. It was lots of fun. I really like that one. So if you're a fan of like the Poirot and the Miss Marple, then you might want to look up the Tommy and Tuppence series and see if you like those as well. So there are lots of fun to read if you like Agatha Christie. So that's it for like bits of newsy chat, I guess. And we do have some knitting questions to answer this week, and you're always welcome to leave knitting questions and I can answer them in the next podcast. And I usually ask just before I record if anybody has any questions so we can discuss them in the podcast. And we have one though that we had in our last episode that I wanted to address again, because I had some advice, but I asked for advice and somebody left a great comment, so I wanted to share that as well. So, okay, Knee Deep in Stitches was wondering if I had any tips or knew why her purling tension would be looser than her knitting. And we discussed that in the last one, so you can go watch that if you want to see what we talked about. But one of the things I did highlight was the fact that you really have to look at how you knit, how you hold the yarn, how you hold the needles, and how that varies from knitting to purling. And personally, like I tend to knit more loosely than I purl, and it's because of the way I bring the yarn to the front. I sort of hold it down and pull it up and around the needle and while I pull it down, and that makes the purls tighter. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't like sit down and watch my own hands while I was knitting to see like the movements that I was making with my hands. So we had another comment from Cindy. She said her purl stitches were larger. She holds her yarn in her right hand. One thing that helped her figure out what she was doing differently was to use her phone. And she did a couple of 15-second videos of knitting, and then she was able to look at that and figure out what she was doing. And it turns out that she was holding her needles at a 90-degree angle when she knit, but she was holding them at a wider angle when she purled. So that was taking a bit more yarn and making the purls bigger. So I loved that she did this. Like that's a great tip, is like to set up your phone and record your hands while you're knitting. Like when you're very relaxed and you're not like trying to watch what you're doing, you're just relaxed and knitting the way that you normally do. And then later you can go back and look at that and really look, what's the difference? What are you doing differently between making a knit stitch and between making that purl stitch? Because you're going to, obviously the yarn and the needles are in two different places as you're creating those stitches, but what are you doing specifically? Like Cindy says, she was holding her needles at a different angle. And I noticed I do the same thing. I hold them like that, like this when I'm doing a knit stitch, but I hold them like that when I purl, and I hadn't noticed that I had done that before either. So that's a really great tip from Cindy. So thank you for sharing that, Cindy. And Knee Deep in Stitches, if you're still trying to look at your tension, then this is another great way to check that out, is to record yourself when you're relaxed and then look at that afterwards to see how you're changing the way you hold the needles, how you're changing the way those stitches are formed. So that was really great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that comment. And for all of our questions, if you have some advice or some tips to share for any of these questions that we're going to talk about, then please share them. And I might share them in the next episode again, because we can all learn from each other. And all improve our skills together. So our first question for this week is from Andrea. I'd like to hear some discussion about the sweet tomato heel for socks, the pros, the cons, the fit, the ease, or difficulty of execution. Any thoughts or comments would be appreciated. So I do need your help with this one because I have not knit the sweet tomato heel by Kat Bordhi, who has sadly passed away. But we do have many wonderful resources that she has left behind. She's got different sock knitting books and videos here on YouTube. And I did find her video about her sweet tomato heel. So I'm going to put a link for it down below, as well as her sock book where she uses this heel. Now this is a method for doing a short row heel, and very often if you've done a short row heel, then it's done in 2 steps. You've got like the one wedge and then you do the other wedge, and that creates your heel. Her short row heel, it's actually done in 3 different wedges. So it creates a slightly different shape. And a lot of people say that it fits much better. But I've never actually knit one myself, so I don't know. But I did watch the video, and it's worth checking out because who better than to learn from than the woman who created that technique. So you'll find the link for that down below. And if you've knit a sweet tomato heel and you have some advice to share, then please leave it down there and we can chat about it again in the next episode. And I think with our sock tutorials that we are probably going to do one with a sweet tomato heel, because I would like to give it a try as well to see how the fit is. Now, if you like short row heels, then it's worth trying this heel to see if you like it. And if you prefer heel flap and gusset, I always say it's great to try different types of constructions to see which one is your favorite or which one fits your foot the best. So it's definitely worth checking out no matter which type of heel you prefer, because the way it's constructed, usually like a heel flap and gusset fits my foot very well. I have a wide heel. A short row heel, which is usually knit on half the stitches of the full sock circumference, sometimes it's not wide enough for my foot. And I know there's other ways to adjust it so it will fit better, but I just find it doesn't fit as well. So I'd like to give this one a try because I've heard that the fit is even more improved over a normal short row heel. So I don't really have any advice for you, Andrea. I'm sorry, but I did find that video. If you haven't seen it, I will link it for you down below so you can watch Kat Bordhi's demonstration of it. And she probably has lots of tips and advice to share in her tutorial that might be helpful to you. Our next question is from Claire. She says, I would love to know more about how to monetize my knitting. It would be great to bring in a little extra cash, but I have no clue where to start beyond a few commissioned knits from friends. So there are quite a few different ways you can monetize, but I do want to caution you that if you take a hobby you love and turn it into your job, it changes how you feel about that hobby. Believe me, I know, because I mean now, like I said before, I have to make time for personal knitting because a lot of the knitting I'm doing is design work or for YouTube, or just, it's not like just personal, I want to knit this for myself kind of thing, but which is a choice because I could do that even on YouTube, but I chose to say, let's talk about socks. I'm going to knit a lot of socks and talk about all the construction methods. And I'm not hating it because I enjoy knitting socks, so it works out fine, but it's not quite the same as just, oh, I feel like knitting this, I'm going to knit this. When I have a deadline, you know, this sock tutorial has to come out next month, so I have to make sure I get these socks done. So it changes your relationship with your hobby. So that is something to consider, because you might find that you don't like that. So I don't mind that with knitting, but I have discovered I need to find another hobby that isn't something that is work. So which for me might be spinning. I just bought a drop spindle recently, and I bought it with the goal I wasn't going to touch it until I finished my master hand knitting course, which is done. So I can do that now, but I've been so busy that I haven't had time. I've been watching lots of videos about it, so I am going to definitely be exploring spinning, which is kind of fiber adjacent, I guess, but it's not something I'm going to turn into a business. But all that to say, it's just something to think about, is whether you really do want to turn it into work, because there are times where I don't want to knit because it feels like work. And then that's usually when I'm doing other things. Like I've been reading a lot of books lately because I used to read a lot and then I stopped for a while because I was just busy with other things. But now I'm finding I'm choosing books more often because those times when knitting feels like a chore and I don't want to pick up my knitting because it's just work. Eeh. So there is that to think about. But ways that you can monetize if you decide that is something that you still want to do. First of all, it would be craft fairs and Etsy would be the first thing on the list. I mean, if you're already knitting certain things and you want to sell them, then you could get a booth at a craft fair and give that a try. And that can vary from area to area. I've got a friend who sells paintings and like she has different like word art and different animal art, and some places do better than others depending on like the income bracket of the area she's in. And I imagine knitting would be the same. I mean, if you've ever run across those people who ask about having a hat and then you tell them how much and they're like, oh, well, I could get it for $10 at Walmart, then go ahead and buy it at Walmart. Why did you ask then? Because they don't understand how much time and effort and money goes into knitting. And really any craft, it goes for any sort of craft thing, unless you're actually involved in that craft or some kind of craft. You don't really know that things take time and money. You just don't think about that unless you're a craft person who does some handcrafts. That would be for any sewing, quilting, all of them. So that is a place to start, and you can try Etsy as well. That's a great online marketplace to give your items a try, but even that's going to take some research to see which things you think would sell well, and do you want to knit a lot of the same thing to sell online. But there's also sample knitting, which is not the same as test knitting. For those who don't know, let's talk about the difference. Test knitters are usually when designers want to have their pattern, they say tested by a lot of different people, but really they should be getting it getting it edited. A tech editor goes through, make sure your math is correct, make sure everything is correct and worded well. Test knitters are there to, some designers use them as editors, which I don't think is a good thing to do. I think you should hire an editor to make sure everything is correct in your pattern. You can use a tester to make sure that it's clear to various knitters in various stages of knitting, like beginner knitters or more advanced knitters. More advanced knitters might be more intuitive and not need more like a lot of hand holding in a pattern. More beginner knitters are going to probably want more of that hand holding. So you want to find the right sweet spot for your patterns, I would suppose. And then it's also used a lot of the time just for exposure for your pattern, like on social media, to have a lot of those projects on Ravelry, things like that. That's what test knitting is usually for. And then we won't even get into the discussion about because I mean, it's free labor that a lot of knitters love to do it. So that's one thing, but a lot of them, it seems like you've got a lot of hoops to jump through to do the test knits, which feels like asking a lot of free labor from people. So that's why I don't do test knits, because I'm just not sure I would want to compensate people in some way for doing that kind of work for me. But anyway, a sample knitter is not the same thing. A sample knitter is somebody who knits the sample and you don't get to keep it. You are usually being paid, sometimes in yarn, sometimes in money. It could be like 10 cents a yard, depending on how many yards the project takes, or maybe 20 cents a yard. I'm not sure like the rates now, the current rates. But what you will do is you'll be sent a specific pattern and you'll be sent the yarn, and you have to knit following that pattern specifically. And then when you're done, you send in that sample. It's basically for places where, like, say somebody is publishing a book and they've got to have 20 different sweaters. They don't have time to knit 20 sweaters. So they hire sample knitters to knit the samples for them. You don't get to keep the sweaters. You have to mail it back in, but you do get paid for knitting the sample. So that is one way to get paid. And it's more of to find jobs like that, you have to sort of just start looking around for them. get on Instagram and follow like some of the big yarn companies that would use sample knitters. I know Brooklyn Tweed does. I know they had a listing right on their website looking for sample knitters. So that is another thing to explore. So, but that's not, you don't get to choose what you knit, and you don't get to keep the item either. And then there is designing, of course. I know a lot of designers, that's why they start designing, because they want just a little cash to spend on their own knitting. So, but the downside to that is anybody can publish a design. It doesn't make it a good design. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, with the advent of anybody can open a website, start an Etsy shop, post a pattern on Ravelry. Some of them are not very well written patterns. It's more like just a recipe, like here's what I did. And it doesn't even have gauge information or yarn information or anything like that. Like, so there is that line to, like, you can publish a pattern, but do you really know how to publish a good quality pattern? But that is something, if you like to come up with your own things, and you start with a pattern, you end up changing so many things that I'm not saying you can do that and then publish what you've done, because that's still somebody else's pattern. But if you're that type of knitter, then it's worth thinking about whether you would want to just design from scratch and sell those patterns, which it's a lot of work. And unless you have like a big following, you're not going to make a lot of money selling patterns. But what you can do as you gain experience designing is design for publications or other yarn shops or places, and they'll pay you to design for them. So you can make money that way as well. And then I also wrote down, okay, you could start a blog or a YouTube channel. That's a good way to make a bit of money. I have ads running on my website and here on YouTube, so I make some money every month in that ad revenue. I also use affiliate links. Like if I link to a book, which we usually talk about a book in every episode, I link to it on Amazon. And then I'm also an affiliate for Knit Picks and Love Crafts, and I have a little disclaimer in the bottom of the video description, and I link to those places sometimes with like a special link. It doesn't cost anybody any extra money to go buy through that link. It just means I get like a little, I don't know, maybe a couple cents up to $1 or $2 or more, depending on how much people spend. It doesn't cost anybody anything extra. It just means I sort of sent some traffic to those places. So I get a little bit of money for doing that. So that's something, I mean, that's also quite a lot of work to do. But it's fun. I enjoy making videos. I enjoy chatting with you and responding to your comments and talking about knitting. So that is another way to monetize your craft. And it doesn't cost anything to start a YouTube channel. If you have a phone, hit record, start a little podcast, share every week what you're knitting. And sometimes they pick up very quickly and you can build a big audience. And you can still, if all you did was do a podcast, you'd be able to knit whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, and share it on the podcast without having to be constricted by like somebody else's schedule, or like if a sample is due at a certain time or design is due, then it does give you some freedom, but it does require quite a lot of work in itself. And the last idea I had was, if you like to do videos or if you're a good photographer, another thing that you can do is you can sell those videos or those photos to like stock image sites. I buy things like that, not personally from other knitters, but like I'm a member of like a stock image website, because sometimes I don't have the right like thumbnail picture that I want, or I just want to pop in like a video of somebody knitting, but I don't want to sit down and do the knitting myself. Then I can go on that website and I can find something to pop into a video or use for a thumbnail. And they get those from people who are doing that thing and taking photos and taking videos. So that's more of an out of the box thing. If you are a fairly good photographer or you like to do little videos, then you could do those and you can sell those to make a little money. It's sort of like knitting adjacent. You could take videos of you knitting and then sell them on these stock photo sites. I'm not going to put a links to, it's something you just have to research if that would be interesting to you. But if anybody has any other ideas, or if anybody has any tips to share about how they make money with their knitting, then please leave them down below. And I did want to share a playlist on another YouTube channel. Her name's Hannah, Knit with Hannah. She has a huge playlist of basically knitting for profit. I think it's like for craft fairs and things like that. But lots of different videos, like 5 minutes up to 15 minutes on different topics about knitting, but for making money. So I'm going to put a link to that playlist down below as well. And then we have one more question from Dory. I'd love to know how to fit a sweater, and I would like to learn more about positive and negative ease. I'd like to understand how to use it to make socks fit more comfortably. Okay, so we've got a few questions in here. So let's address the one about positive and negative ease first. So ease is basically the amount of space between the knitted thing and your body. So if you're wearing an oversized t-shirt or an oversized shirt, if I pull this out, I got, goodness, maybe a good 3 inches of ease right there. 4 inches, I don't know. But there's more space between the garment and my body. And I'm wearing a camisole type tank thing underneath, which has negative ease, meaning it's smaller than my body, so it's very tight fitting when I put it on. So negative and positive, that's all that's referring to is how much space between the garment and your body. So this is going to, how much ease you want depends on the garment you are knitting. So when we're talking about socks, we want negative ease. If you knit socks that are bigger around than your foot, like my foot is 10 inches, the circumference on the widest part. I have a wide foot. If I knit a sock that has 11 inches of, like it's 11 inches around, meaning it has an inch of ease, that sock is going to be too big for my foot. It's going to flop all over. It's not going to stand my foot at all. So in the case of my foot and a sock, I want it to have negative ease, usually about 10% for an adult size foot, which is about an inch. So for my 10-inch circumference foot, I knit a sock that has a 9-inch circumference. So 10 inches minus 9 inches gives me 1 inch. I have 1 inch of negative ease in that sock. So does that explain that? I hope, Dory, that when you talk about ease, it's the space between the garment and your body part, wherever it's fitting. So in the case of a sock, we want less space. We want no space, actually. We want less than what our foot circumference is to make sure that sock is going to stay in place. So like I said, my 10-inch circumference foot, I knit a sock that is 9 inches in circumference to make sure that it's going to stay in place. And that is 1 inch of negative ease. It's 1 inch smaller than my foot. I probably would not want that in my sweater. I'm a larger person and I don't like very form-fitting clothes. Even when I was smaller, I didn't. You most likely are going to want some ease in your garment, or for form-fitting, you're probably going to want it to be the same size as your body when you're talking about knitting. But most of the time, you're going to want some positive ease. There might be times if you knit like a little camisole or something, then you're probably going to knit it with no ease. You're going to knit it to be the same size as your body, or maybe even a little negative ease. It's totally personal choice. But with a sweater, fit is a whole different thing. I hope that explains the positive and negative ease. And I know this is where it gets confusing is when we talk about sweaters, because we have different measurements in the pattern. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes in. Patterns, when it's talking about, it'll say like, it could say for sizes extra small, small, large, or it could use numbers, it could use letters. Just ignore those. It doesn't really matter. You want to look at the garment and it'll have the finished measurements for the garment. It's not the finished measurements for your body. It's the finished measurements for whatever that sweater is. And then it should say, ignoring that extra small or whatever numbers, it should have bust measurements, not for the sweater, but for a body. It should say this sweater, let's say sweater B with a 40, it has a 40-inch bust, and it's meant to be worn by a person with a 36-inch bust. So if we think about ease again, 40-inch sweater, 36-inch bust, that's 4 inches of positive ease. It's 4 inches bigger than your body. So when you're looking at patterns, you have to decipher which measurement is which, whether it's talking about the sweater itself or whether it's referring to the person's bust or their body measurement. A good pattern will have both. It should tell you this is the size of the sweater itself. This is when you can look at the schematics as well to get all of the other measurements, not just a bust measurement. So you look at the finished measurement for the garment, and then it should tell you how much. Either it should tell you for a bust, a specific bust size referring to the person's body, and it should tell you it should hopefully tell you how much ease should be used for that specific garment. So you can choose the one that will fit you best. Now, fit is a personal issue because a sweater might recommend that you have 4 to 6 inches of ease, but that doesn't mean you have to knit a sweater with 4 to 6 inches of ease. It's a personal choice. Perhaps you want more ease, perhaps you want less. So this is when I think it's a good idea, if you have a few, even t-shirts, if you have some shirts in your closet that fit you well, pull them out and measure them and see what those measurements are. And then you can use that sort of like as a guide as you're knitting a sweater that has sort of the same shape. Then you can use the measurements from that favorite shirt to choose the size for the size that you want to knit, even if the ease isn't the same amount of ease as the designer intended. There's so much to discuss with this topic. I feel like it needs a whole video all by itself. What was I going to say? There was something else. Oh, I think a common mistake I see is, especially with women, is we overestimate how much, like the size of our body or how much ease we need to be comfortable, and we end up knitting things that are way too big. And because what happens is you choose something to fit your bust. And if you're like, say, larger than a B cup, then the sweater up here is not going to fit very well. It's going to be way too big because you picked one that fit around this part of your body. And if your bust is larger, you'll know, I mean, you've got measurements that don't change much on your, like compared to your size, like the size of your neck opening. I mean, my neck is a little wider than it used to be when I was thinner, but like my shoulders are not going to change no matter how much weight I gain or lose. My shoulder depth is still going to be the same. My shoulder, like your upper bust or upper chest, the part like under your armpits right there, that doesn't change very much no matter like how much weight you've lost or gained. Your bust will change significantly. So sometimes if you have a larger bust, it's better to choose an upper bust measurement when you're looking at those sweater patterns instead of your full bust. And then add short row shaping for bust darts, or like you can do, there's different ways to add bust shaping. You can cast on extra stitches at the underarm if you're working top down to get more fabric in this area. But the problem I see most often is because women, especially fuller busted, choose a pattern based on that full bust, and then it's way too big in their like up here on their shoulders. And that's where you want a sweater to fit well. You don't want it to be falling open on the neckline and falling off. So fit it's hard to talk about in one short video because there's just so much to discuss. I would recommend, if you have a good local library, look up Amy Herzog's books. She talks a lot about fit in her books, or Craftsy too. I think she has some classes on Craftsy specifically about fit, and she really dives deep into that topic and really discusses it very, very well. So I'll try to remember to put some links down below for some of her books. And for her, I'm fairly sure she has some Craftsy classes, so you can explore this further. So before we get to what is on my needles, I just wanted to share about this week's sponsor, which is Knit Picks. They have some fabulous new yarns. They're Upcycle Alpaca. This one here, which is a worsted weight, and then they also have a sport weight. Now these two yarns, let me see. It is a blend of alpaca and wool and acrylic. So it's still hand washable, but it's really good sturdy yarn, like a nice high twist, but really soft. Then they also have a new Suri alpaca, which Oh, it's so soft. I'm not one for fuzzy yarns. I don't know. I don't really like them around my face or my neck too much, especially sometimes if they're scratchy, but this one is not scratchy. It's so, so soft. My daughter has already claimed it. I just knit the whole thing up into a simple cowl because that's what she wanted. She wanted something cozy and squishy around her face. So this is their Suri alpaca, their upcycle. So what that means is it's all the leftover bits that end up on the yarn floor that don't actually make it into the yarn. They gather that all up and then reuse it and upcycle it into this new yarn. So this one is 100% Suri alpaca, really, really soft. So if you're looking for some new yarns to try that have some alpaca in them, if you're a fan of alpaca, or if you're not, these are just great blends. They're really nice. They feel nice. They're nice and soft. They're this one's a sport weight, this one's a worsted weight, I just love that they're just using up all those leftover bits. You know, like I think that's really great that they take all of the yarn waste from the process, the manufacturing process, and they combine it all and make more yarn. Who doesn't want more yarn? So thank you to Knitpicks for sponsoring this video. They did send me this yarn because it's a new release and they wanted to get the word out. So I'm sharing it here with you today. And that brings me to what is off my needles, and that Suri alpaca cowl would be the first thing. I still have to weave in the ends and give it a nice good soak, but oh, it is so soft. But this would be a lovely one to like hold double with another yarn, but this is just the alpaca, nothing else with it. So I cast on, we figured I think about 20 inches around for something that's still close to the neck, but not like choking you, and would still have a nice little drape. And then I just cast on and I just knit and knit and knit until I used up all of the yarn, and then had enough to finish binding off. And then I just have to get those tails woven in. So it's lovely and soft and very light. So I think I'm just usually not one to have something fuzzy in my face, but thinking for a hat, this would be really nice. My daughter wanted it as a cowl, so she saw this one and she's like, I want that. So, so this one is done, and I might give it a wash, and if she's forgotten about it, just like sneak it into her Christmas stocking. We'll see if she doesn't remember, then I might just do that with it. So this was 100% Suri alpaca, and it's that Upcycle yarn from Knitpicks. And the next thing off my needles is a hat and mitten pattern. Well, the pattern's not done. I'm working on that, but the mittens and the hat are done. Now the mittens I think came out just perfect. I really like them. They're only going to be one size in the pattern though, because the cuff, the repeat's just too big. It would be like, I think 2 inches, and that's a big change from one size to another in mittens. So I think it's just going to be one size. The hat, I don't know. I tried it on again today, and I'm still not loving it. I had already ripped it out once because this part was too wide. I like that part now, but now I'm wondering, I don't think like a beret was the right shape for this. So I'm considering ripping out the whole thing. I know, and doing it all again. But doing it more as a beanie instead of like, I did more of a tam style where I had one certain number of stitches, and I cast on a lot of stitches for this part. And I like the fullness of it, but it just looks sort of flat when you wear it on your head. I'm not putting it on because it doesn't look very good. It just didn't come out the way I wanted it to. So I think instead I'm going to size it down slightly, go down another needle size for the brim because it fits, but it's on the loose side. So I think I'm gonna like do it again, but do it with more of a beanie shape and with a gathered top. Like it just didn't work the way I wanted it to, but I really like the pattern on there. So yeah, I think at this point I just haven't done it yet because, you know, I mean, you finish a project, you think you're done, and you're just like, it's not quite right. So I've got to rip it out. And that is still, hopefully I'll get to that this week because I'd like to release this pattern as like a Christmas gift to my email list. So if you're on the email list, hopefully in December I will have this finally finished. The mittens will be at least, but I'd like to have the mittens and the hat together and release them as like a gift to my subscribers. But we have to work out this hat pattern first. But the pattern is an issue, but the yarn is absolutely lovely. This uses a Canadian yarn company, Julie Asselin, her Journey worsted yarn in the natural color. And then the pink is called Fleur. So here in well, I'm not in Montreal, but it's in Montreal, in Quebec. So a lot of the names are French terms. It's a lovely yarn. I think it's, I don't remember how many plies, 4 maybe, but very good twist, nice high twist. Not something I would actually choose for a lot of color work, but I wanted something that had really nice high contrast and really did show the stitches, because I mean, a lot of times, like with Farrell, you want them to sort of blend together. I didn't want that in this case. I wanted to like really see my stitches and make them really defined, because I think it just looks really pretty in this particular pattern, like sort of that geometric design. So yes, the yarn is lovely. And it's standing up really well to being ripped out and reused, because I've done this hat a couple times now. I've ripped it back a few times, and now I'm going to rip it all out and do it again. So hopefully this 3rd time will be a charm. And the yarn's holding up great, even with all that ripping out. I think it's 100% wool. I don't have the yarn label handy. I want to say it's Targhee and Rambouillet. And it's all sourced, at least in North America. I know that. It might be Canada. But I know it's at least North America. So it's all like locally sourced and then dyed here in Quebec. So it's really lovely yarn. I've used it for another project, a poncho that I designed for cast on, and the sweater that's behind me. This is the leftovers actually. That's why I had some leftovers, so I decided to knit with them. But I used it for this design as well, which just came out in cast on actually. So I'll put a link down there if you want to check that out. So if you're not on the email list, then you might want to join, because you will get at least the mitten pattern for free as your Christmas gift. Hopefully I'll have this hat reworked and figured out by then though too. And the last thing off my needles is a pair of plain old shorty socks. Now we are doing a series of sock tutorials, and this was a pair of socks for the very first one. Double pointed needles, heel flap and gusset, and we did very simple. I didn't even do any patterning on the heel. It's just plain stockinette, a round or French heel. So if you're new to knitting socks on double pointed needles, then this is a great tutorial, at least I think it is, that walks you through this pattern. So the pattern includes 11 different sizes, from like a toddler size all the way up to an adult man. So every single size that you could imagine for a sock. So if you're looking for a tutorial for socks, then that is also in my finished list. Now this one uses really fabulous self-striping yarn from Scrumptious Purl. This is her Stripe Me Up base, which is a merino nylon base, really soft and beautiful. This is the Christmas Berries colorway. Sort of reminds me of like mistletoe and stuff. It's very, very pretty. And I am working on another sock using her yarn actually. So that gets us into the next thing, what's on my needles. So I'm currently working on the next sock in our sock knitting series, which is on a magic loop. You can see I'm working on it right there. Now this one is knit 2 purl 2 rib, and I've even continued that down on, we're continuing our heel flap and gusset. This time heel flap and gusset in the knit 2 purl 2 rib, just the heel flap. And we're doing a square heel instead of a round heel this time, just so you can see the difference if you're knitting along every month, to see all of the different sock techniques, I guess, and a method for knitting magic loop heel flap and gusset, because I mean, I think there's different ways to do the magic loop method, and then depending on the sock, like you're going to do it one way if it's a heel flap and gusset, and another way if it's short row. So that's going to be the next tutorial, is 2 socks at a time, and probably with short row heels, because I'm not sure I want to tackle heel flap and gusset with 2 socks at a time on magic loop. That seems like it's going to hurt my brain. But this yarn is also Scrumptious Purl yarns. This one is the Stripe Me Up base, superwash merino and nylon. This colorway is called Cornflowers, and I just think it reminds me of like a Monet's Water Lilies or something like that. All of those lilacs and greens, and just very pretty colors. So that is the first sock on my needle, so I can get the pattern all worked out as I knit, and then I'll knit the second sock and we'll be ready for our tutorial. The next thing on my needles is this bias knit, well, this is the scarf version. There's going to be a scarf and a wrap. I'm making quite good progress on this. So it started down here at this point, and then I was increasing at both edges till it got as wide as I wanted it to be. And then I started decreasing on one edge, and I'm still increasing on this side, so that gives it that bias shaping. Can you see the that knit 2 purl 2 rib, but it's sort of going off to one side. So it is just, it's very simple pattern because it's just knit 2 purl 2 rib, but we've got this I-cord edging, and then we've got that bias shaping. So you've got to pay attention to your edges because you're still increasing on one side, but you're decreasing on the other. At this point, your stitch count's staying the same, but it's still sort of like going off on the bias. So it's very fun knitting, but very simple. So I cranked out a lot of it this weekend because it's sort of mindless knitting. It's just knit 2 purl 2. You have to pay attention to the edges a little bit, but that's it. It's using this lovely yarn. This is called Goldenrod from Alpaca Yarns. It's her silk and linen, 65% silk, 35% linen. Very nice and soft. I was surprised it would be so soft because linen can be hard on the hands, but this one is really easy to knit with. But I'm also knitting it, I think, might be size, maybe size 4. I don't remember, and I can't see the needle size on here. But so it's sort of open and airy because it is, I want it to be like a summer wrap or a summer scarf, nothing too heavy. So it's got that lovely, you know, silk and linen drape to it already. And I'm sure it's going to be even softer and lovelier after I wash it because of that linen, you know, it gets softer as you wash. So this is going to be the scarf, and I've got another color. It's like this silvery shiny, it's called Platinum, also from Alpaca Yarns. Same yarn, just a different color. So it's going to be like the same thing, but a wider depth. So it's more like a wrap. So for those chilly air-conditioned spaces, you know, in the summer. So this will be coming out, let me see, in April, I think. I'm just picking away at it now because it's such a large well, I'm knitting 2 of them, and it's a larger project, like a big wrap that uses a light yarn. So it's going to take me a while. So I figure if I just do a little bit at a time every month, then by April it'll be all finished instead of trying to cram it all in into March or something like that. So making good progress on this, and probably going to be about, that's probably half of it, I think, because it's just going to be a scarf, this one. But it's looking good, and the yarn is really just lovely to knit with. This would be really great yarn for like a summer top, you know, like those boxy, oversized, where it's like just 2 rectangles that you sew together, really simple, no sleeves, that kind of a top. Maybe I need to make one of those for the summer in this yarn. It's a really lovely yarn. And I've got one really big sort of design project on my needles right now. I'm working on a design for Cast On magazine, a lace shawl. It doesn't look like much right now because it's one big lump. So, but it's worked from the center out into a big square. So it's sort of like if you've ever done a triangle shawl where you've got 2 triangles that make up the one larger triangle. This is basically double that. It's like 4 triangles all the way around, but 2 triangle shawls. So you start in the center. Where is the center? I can't find it. There it is. And you like sort of work out from there. So it's all over lace and then a lace border. And now I finished like this edging. Now, I don't remember how many stitches, like 500 and some around the outside, but I'm doing an applied edging all the way around, which is going to take a while because I mean, it's 500 and some stitches. And if you've ever done an applied edging, or if you haven't, you're working like a perpendicular. The shawl's going this way, but I'm knitting this way and binding off 1 stitch on the shawl for every 2 rows that I add. And my edging is like 17 stitches wide. So I knit 2 rows of that to bind off 1 stitch of the shawl. So I think I worked it out to be like 74 repeats of this 16 row chart that I have to do to get all the way around the shawl. So it's going to take me a while to do that, I think, but that's my big project right now for the next month, is to just get the border done. The body of the shawl didn't actually take me that long. Towards the end, though, I mean, because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Towards the end, the last inch or so, it was like, it took a lot of time just to finish 1 or 2 rows. But the edging, I think, is going to take a while because you can't even see. I think it must be like 40 inches around. I don't know. It's really, really big. It's hard to show on screen because it's still all on the needles. But the yarn is just, oh, it's lovely. Really lovely yarn. I have to say, when I design for like commission design, like for magazines and stuff, I get to try some beautiful yarns that I probably wouldn't purchase for myself, if depending, like sometimes I like to splurge. Like if I save up for my birthday money or Christmas, then I will I'll spend a little more on a splurge. But sometimes, like, I knit on a budget. I try to save money where I can, and I'm sure you do too. Unless you got lots of money to throw around on yarn, then good for you. But those of us that can't, but this one, oh, it is lovely. It's Gelina Yarns. It's another Quebec company. This one is her Bella yarn. It's 75% merino, 15% cashmere, and 10% silk. There's 500 yards in a skein, and it goes a long way. With this shawl, I thought I would need more than I did. And I do try to order enough, so I mean, I don't want to run out of yarn when I'm designing something, but this is going a lot further than I thought it would. This colorway is called Starless Night. It's a new color that she's just released, and oh, it's lovely. It's just a rich blue. I really love blue, and I really like this color. Well, what happened is actually I had written down a few color ideas for the shawl, and she didn't have, well, the first one that they mentioned in stock, and she asked if she could send me a different one instead, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And oh, I'm so glad I got this one. The color is lovely. The yarn, it's one of those splurge-worthy yarns. It's got that bit of cashmere in it, and it's got that bit of silk, so it's very drapey and lovely. And it's got like just a tiny bit of a sheen from the silk. So it's perfect for shawls. Like it's stunning. Like comes in a lot of wonderful colors as well. So I'll have a link to her shop. It's one of those, like if you have like a shawl that is sort of, you've been wanting to knit, but you want the right yarn for it and you want like a really nice yarn, I can definitely recommend this yarn. It's lovely. It's the colors, her colors are beautiful. The yarn, that little bit of cashmere, it just makes it feel, try not to lose my tag here, makes it feel very luxurious. So if you're looking for a splurge-worthy type of project, then her yarn. And it's almost 497 yards. So 500 yards in a skein of this yarn. So you're getting a lot of yarn. And I do think it's a fingering weight yarn, I think. It doesn't say on the label, but I'm pretty sure it is. So that's everything that is on my needles, and we do have lots of upcoming things. I think I've mentioned it in the past, but if you haven't watched the last few, then you might not have heard. We're doing socks all for the next few months. We just released our socks on double pointed needles, and next is our magic loop sock, which I just showed you because I'm working on it right now. Then in January, we're going to be tackling 2 socks at a time on magic loop using Alley Cat yarns. And she's got some fabulous sock yarns. This is her smooth sock. It's a superwash merino nylon blend. And then her Leo sock, which is a BFL blend. So it's a little bit more hard wearing. So if you're harder on your socks and you tend to wear them out, then you might want to try a BFL because it is a slightly more rustic feeling. You're not going to notice a difference on your feet. You can as you touch them, like the merino is slightly softer, but this one is going to be more hard wearing if you are the type that wears out your socks. So we've got some tutorials coming up using her fabulous yarn. And also in January, we are going to be doing a giveaway for some of her yarns, 2 skeins of yarn and then some other little goodies that she sent along. She kindly provided these yarns for me to give away to a viewer. So you'll want to be back in January so you can enter that giveaway for her fabulous yarn. Okay, now we're definitely on our last thing. This has been a long episode and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but we are the Nerdy Knitting Podcast and we need to talk about nerdy things like books. And I love to talk about recommended knitting books that you can check out. Check your local library. That's what I do a lot. This one came from the library, but I like to share the ones that I find at the library and then they end up on my wish list because I like them so well. And this one is definitely on my wish list. And it's not a cheap book. That's the one downside, but it's packed full, so it's worth the money. And it's a beautiful hardcover. Even has one of those ribbon bookmarks, which is really nice, and it lays flat when it's open, which I really appreciate. Now this one is for, I would say it's for mitten lovers, but also if you're if you like to design your own kind of projects and you're looking for stitch dictionaries, this is a fabulous stitch dictionary. Even if you don't want to knit mittens, you can use the stitches for other things as well. And I love color work, but I am really drawn to the high contrast colors of like the Norwegian knitting and Scandinavian knitting, or like the Selbu mitts where they're all like cream colored yarn and then they use like brown or black or a very high contrast. I can appreciate Fair Isle knitting, but that's more of those muted, lots of colors, but very muted tones. And I like the way they look, but for me to wear personally, I like the high contrast. It's just personal preference. Like on the sweater behind me, I did the high contrast sleeves, like just, it's still stranded color work technically, but it's definitely not Fair Isle because it's that high contrast. It's more like what you'd see in the Scandinavian countries, or I think that's what drew me to this book, the Selbu Mittens. So I'm going to do some overhead shots here so you can see. But this book, it has patterns for the mittens as well as lots and lots and lots of stitch charts. Now I should start by saying like this is a Norwegian knitting tradition. So that's probably why I'm drawn to it, because of that high contrast, that Norwegian style. So the opening section has lots of the history of these types of mittens and why they were knit and how they were knit, and some wonderful pictures that like show the different designs you would see or how they would be knit. And then there's a section for techniques and the types of yarn used, like just lots of really good information. Then a really great section on the motifs and the different types of motifs you'll see in these mittens and how they're used, like the star motif. And then you'll see lots of examples of that motif, and then you've got pages and pages of these stitch patterns, which of course, I mean, they're using them specifically on mittens, but there's no reason you couldn't use these in other projects as well. And here's even more, like some of the other smaller motifs that you see. It's just full. So it breaks down these different motifs and it shows them on different types of mittens and gloves. And then it has a lot of those, that specific motif broken down into different types of patterns. So it's just, there's so much to explore in this book. And then in the last section, it has actual patterns for some of these mittens. So if you don't want to actually design any, you just want to knit your own, then it's got the whole pattern for you. Now, the one thing you'll want to know here is that there's no written instructions. Well, I mean, for like the stitch patterns, you've got the written instruction for the pattern, but it's just, you're only going to see charted instructions for the design itself. And then right in the back, it has even like a design your own chart. So you can make a photocopy of this chart and then use some of those stitch patterns to design your own. It's got a child, a man's, and a woman's size mitten in here. So it's just a really lovely, lovely book. And there's a ton, like I can't tell you, like this just full of stitch patterns that you can use for, like I said, more than mittens. You can apply them to lots and lots of different stranded color work. You could even use them for textured patterns. You could use the dots as like purl stitches instead and just do like a textured pattern with the same, and that would be really lovely. But if you're a mitten knitter, you could knit mittens for life with this book. There's so much in here to explore. So definitely one to check out. If you can find it at your local library, you can give it a look to see. But Selbu Mittens by Bardsgard. I'll have a link to the Amazon book down below. Now that's all for this episode of the Nerdy Knitting Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. It was a pleasure to sit and chat with you today, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you're new here, I'll put a playlist right here and you can click through and watch past episodes and catch up on other questions and things that we've been knitting and talking about here on the podcast. See you in the next video.